would like to thank the organizers very much for the opportunity to present this panel, some ongoing research which has been much supported by St. Edmund's College, Cambridge. It was meant to be a paper of reading into the sources. And then I thought, well, they will ask the question, but do we know anything about these nuns in Alexandria, in Palestine? And I thought, oh well, probably better to look up that. And honestly, this is just informed guesswork. Unlike all other papers here, I'm not giving any really hard historical information. It is just reading into a few other sources. After the last paper focused on the relationship in Egypt during the early Islamic period between developing monastic institutions and the civil authorities, especially in the field of economy and taxation, I will look back at the pre-Islamic and, transition really, at an incident involving two groups trying to live their Coenobitic life in a foreign land. Their identity did not have continuity, such as seen for those nuns, monks, who remained in their provinces. However, also for these, the first Muslim expansion was the end of Antiquity, because what makes life in the Roman Empire different of life for monks, say in Persia or beyond the frontier, that those social and economic privileges characteristic of it, they ended. I focus on four sources to discuss the social presence of Amayuana and her nuns. The first two show them actively proselytizing their ways of Christian life and thereby attracting followers who bring wealth to the foundation. The first is a petition vaguely to be dated to the 6th to 8th century. Eulogitus claimed he was in great economic trouble and, not being able to give his wife and daughter anything any longer, had sent them to join another daughter in Amayuania's monastery. It is implicit that it was not a temporary move to weather out the situation, but that they had become part of that Coenobitic community. I'm not sure they became nuns, actually, or working force. The house seems to have been widely known and socially accepted, not only as a destiny for women whose families are in financial distress, but also for its allure for young daughters. Eulogitus' petition has opening and closing formulae and even scripts found more often in petitions to higher officials. So this is more or less like using a rhetoric more elaborate than it's actually needed. The second passage possibly refers to the same community, but in a different setting, Carthage. To present the character and actions of George, Eparch of Africa, the latter describes that they, as well as some Palestinian nuns of a community of the Sacerdos, had been welcomed by him with his usual compassion. He had settled the emigrating nuns by giving them a rich house plus an abundant donation. Nothing indicates that the nuns modified their rituals, practices, and beliefs, nor is a language barrier mentioned, only that a cultural shock escalated. Their urban asceticism competed for the souls and the money with local religious institutions, authorities, and leaders, as well as with civic institutions. They are being stolen from our marriages. Even if Egyptian and Palestinian monasticism were known from accounts or even direct contact when afar, encountering it at home over a prolonged period seems to have been a different experience. Both houses were functioning like female monasteries. According to imperial legislation as such, they should have been founded and be under the jurisdiction of the local bishop, a non-entity in the whole story. However, no one was apparently accountable for the nuns, and they did not owe explanation or money to any other authority. In the letters transmitted in Maximus Confessor's works, George had taken the initiative to sort the problems out, the problems he caused. Most likely, they present only a fraction of a complex situation. Other people, including the nuns, would probably have sent complaints or petitions about George's unwarranted initiative. Maximus describes the arrival of writings detailing the usual imperial and episcopal instructions on such matters as George's success in securing ecclesiastic and imperial support. In this version, the Oriental nuns refused to acknowledge George's spiritual authority, as well as his social, disciplinary, and fiscal authority. They were unwilling to hand over to him their property, which probably included a large income of donations and dowries, according to the reference to their ingratitude in Letter 12 and to Letter 18. Letter 18. After a theological introduction, which does not necessarily differ of what the nuns to whom the letter is addressed had been confessing, George, the sender, both demanded from them the return of the gifts and committed himself to ensuring they can keep their ktisi. It is not necessary to ascribe Letter 18 to Maximus under George's nom de plume, since as an educated man, as involved in Christian monasticism as George, he would have known how to use a claim such as his fight for his virtue against the devil, or another traditional image of monastic hagiography and further monastic literature to expound his argument. Maximus' previous involvement in the matter is nowhere to be seen, only now when George enrolled his help when turning to ecclesiastic authorities in local and imperial capitals, the court, he also asks for Maximus' help and Maximus to write to his contacts. The letters point out the nuns' faults and present George and his actions exempt from blame. They extol his upright character, correct faith, and unblemished piety, singling out a number of his efforts to excel in a Christian way of life. It is a cause for divine blessing of the province. The reader is told that George received letters which specified 3 punitive measures for those persevering in deviant beliefs and practices: the standard exile of heretics and confiscation of their goods for the public treasury, plus the scattering in orthodox asceterios. According to Maximus, the Palestinian nuns kept their beliefs and were divided. The Alexandrians kept their house, both continued to transgress in faith and piety respectively. Throughout the letters, Maximus characterized the 2 groups of nuns differently. Anaioanians never are accused of heresy in faith. He linked the Palestinian nuns to Severus' teaching, a recalcitrant anti-Chalcedonian monophysite, which is the main topic and reason for the transmission of Letter 12. By the time Maximus wrote it to his contact at court, Cubicularis, George had allegedly imprisoned the Alexandrian nuns and beaten up the Palestinians as usual punishment for those persevering in heresy. That was actually never meant to have happened according to imperial advice. But Maximus also narrated George saying to them not to insult the patricius' reputation. So the beating and imprisoning can also have been an attempt to demonstrate to the population that none of the foreign nuns enjoyed imperial favor, such as contained in a letter from the Empress Martina, which had spread among the population. Its irreproachable letter-bearer, the Cancellarius Theodore, had succeeded in circumventing the official channels for the circulation of such an imperial letter, which would have left the announcement of the arrival of the letter and of its contents hostage to the interests of the members of the administration usually involved in proclaiming imperial communication. They were, however, being denounced in the very same letter for imprisoning the nuns against the imperial wishes of their patrician. Prosecuted, George fell from his office, and all who continued to support him from imperial favor, including Maximus. In Maximus' hagiography, this incident is etiological of later confrontations with the court bearing on theological matters key in church history. Sources not directly related to the construction or deconstruction of Maximus' reputation suggest that his presence in Carthage was decisive for Ammianius' nuns' arrival, and that they were not heretics. Well, usually both groups of nuns are said to have fled Egypt, Palestine, because of Arab incursions, and to be monophysite because of Martinus' support. Now, if Maximus was known to have been in communion with Ammianius' nuns since their arrival, imputing disciplinary faults which could not be associated to his influence on them, would distance himself from them without a backlash on his spiritual authority. Maximus and George's letters exempt Maximus from all disciplinary transgressions, imputing them to the nuns' moral faults and, to a lesser extent, to George's well-meant but somewhat naive magnanimity. The arrival of either group may have happened earlier and have had nothing to do with actual Saracen violence against Christian houses. Now, Maximus and Eulogitus expected the aristocrats to whom they wrote to be familiar with the house of Ammianius, suggesting it was well known and easy to identify with one house. However, as always, almost always, this monastic foundation is invisible in literature and archaeology. With a good amount of lexical freedom, some information can be associated to Mother Johanna, including a chapter in John Bosco's celebration of urban asceticism, the very same urban asceticism which they were practicing in Carthage, the spiritual method. Like a collection of extended sayings of the Father, it presents itself as the collected wisdom of a pan-Mediterranean church, much like the Islamic is not. It presents us Mama Muyania, in the words of her brother, a Bishop Adelphius of Arabessus, as the head of a female monastic house, which had been and remained a venerable place by the visit of John Chrysostom. And the information from Adelphius' revelation-like vision of patriarchs and disclosure about Chrysostom's higher degree of holiness than theirs, beyond the living human beings by the Lord's throne. It is a variant of one of Antony's sayings, possibly here favoring Amma's memorialization, the literary equivalent of George's financial support to Amma Ioanna's nuns. Later authors omit her, keep Adelphius, which may reflect censure of the representation of female asceticism or of her character, or its irrelevance. Although the Ammas in these literary writings were literally invented, they were either plausible or de facto parts of the cultural memory based on historical semi-eremitic female monks. She was a historiographical truth for Moscus and possibly for Maximus too, just as Mother Johanna was for her nuns 1 or 2 generations later. For now, I will assume they are the same Amma, Ioanna, Yania, whatever, considering the rarity of the name in monastic literature. Moscow's Yania's house blessed by the assurance of the whereabouts of the source of joy for the Church of God, would not be anti-Chalcedonian. In Carthage, however, they erred, holding a wrong piety in that they were not following ecclesiastic discipline. George's foundation can be better understood looking at Maximus' later involvement with Gregory. He was then accused of enticing the exarch to become a new Constantine. In short, a holder of jurisdiction also in Christian matters. Could Maximus not have encouraged George likewise in holding the jurisdiction and property of a religious foundation? He could offer a safe haven to nuns who were, like him, perhaps antagonized in their homeland. Now, the Palestinian nuns, what about them? I don't have any source, really, on them, except that we have the narratives of Sassanid violence, Persian violence against the nuns, which are not really that factual, that historical either, because for a number of reasons, the representation of the Persian violence used a lot of tropes of images, making it worse than archaeologically we can see on the ground. Still, it is possible that these nuns, at least, if they fled at this time of the Arab expansion, they were the direct receivers of all this representation of the Persian violence. They were there on the ground. They were hearing Severus or whoever's preaching on how that violence had been bad, and they were hearing about events that were likened to that violence. They may have fled simply out of fear that something might have happened, or they may have fled earlier from Persian violence itself. Now, why do the Alexandrian nuns flee Arab violence when they, as monastic communities, are actually aware that some tribes antagonize them, some tribes look for their help in health and other spiritual matters? They may have worried about the loss of financial and legal support of the rulers and of those who wanted social and political recognition. For example, of a George giving them a large endowment which would make him look good in the eyes of the society, in the eyes of the government. George's foundation may not have been a solution for refugees which got to Carthage in the first place, but an invitation to immigrate there as emigrants or as refugees. Now, if as refugees, why not intra-Christian violence, such as that which Maximus himself was experiencing? Now, for that, I turn to this papyrus, mid-6th century, which is one of Nicolaus' famous letters from Naklun. And the point is, usually, the point is, he mentions also Kyra Yannias, and it is possible that, well, Nicolaus and Johannes, they are sharing this network. It's not clear what they are talking about. The letter bearer, he will have a lot to say, and the addressee is actually not part of this conversation. So somehow that is not related to administrative matters, which are the topic here. It's financial matters. Now the point is, destruction of Naklun is conventionally associated by scholars to the Arabs, who would have targeted it for the sake of its institutional links to the administration, signaling that it would have been Chalcedonian. However, hagiographies more or less on the same time, they will describe the place as being a haven for monophysites, because they are really telling of this holy man who is expelled and he's a monophysite. They describe popular violence, expulsion and persecution after being accused of heresy and exposed to the enforcement of imperial or ecclesiastic rulings. The same sort of ruling which is used against the Alexandrian and Palestinian nuns in Carthage. The narrative suggests that monks fleeing either intra or extra-Roman violences tended for nearer destinations in the east than going all the way to Carthage. Now, what happened? In the east, they returned to their monasteries mostly. They resettle them. They are people who are influenced by the reputation of the place. They just return to the same tradition. And in Carthage, we don't know anything about what happened to the nuns. They disappeared. Why do they disappear? Were they disbanded? Were they scattered? Or did they actually manage to keep getting a lot of influx? Now, what happens if you get a lot of local influx? What happens if the narratives which associate you to the east, they are actually narratives which associate you to a George and a Maximus who fell out of imperial favor in, administration and theology? You just don't want to keep those narratives alive. You lose your cultural identity because of the influx of people speaking local language, practicing the rites the local way. You don't want to preserve the narratives that count. You disappear. And in the East? Well, in the East, that sort of networking with the administration, which makes really life in the Roman Empire that much different of life in the Persian Empire, that also ended, right? Or did it not? If we, for example, look exactly at what we were seeing about monks petitioning now to the Arab rulers. Thank you for your attention.